mentioning as well. So I think that's what we have on our plate for the day, and I think probably we'll be able to wrap it around kind of like at the max of like 2 hours. That's the idea that we have. So if you guys have like any questions, please let me know. Or I mean, like even during the talk or anything that you have issues, please reach out. Like if you do not have my number, I think I have like drawn my number, but then still, if you have anything at all, you can still reach out to your POCs, and they will be getting in touch with me as well. So we'll be like in the loop, and we'll make sure everything is like seamless. So yeah, that's the plan for the day. So guys, how's it going?
It's good. It's early here in California.
Oh, you're in California?
Yeah, it's 8 in the morning here, and I gather it's 8:30 in the evening in India.
Yeah, in
Is the
India it's
audience
like
mostly going to be in India?
yeah, it's mostly gonna be like the first year, maybe like second year students of the undergrad.
And yet it looks like the entire panel's in America.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in Seattle as well, so I'm
It's
really
good.
not used to waking up this early.
Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, the thing.
Up at 4:30 this morning.
Oh, man. I'm totally definitely
Seattle
not.
is also like I think Seattle is also in the Mountain Standard Time, right?
No, Seattle is same as California, Pacific time.
Oh.
It's all on the West Coast.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it's 8 for me as well. I mean, here in Arizona also.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Wait,
we don't have daylight saving.
Oh, that's true. Oh my God, I forgot. That's true.
Yeah, and then I work remotely right now, and my company follows the Central Standard Time, so I gotta wake up at 6 o'clock in the morning.
Oh,
That is difficult.
that's not a place for me to be at. I'll say that.
Yeah, I was actually planning to move to a different place to like work just for the summer.
Oh,
6
yeah.
o'clock is really tiring. But I get to like finish off my day at 3 o'clock, so
That's true. Your evening frees up.
yeah. But Arizona has the dreadest summers, so you cannot go outside until like you have the sunset.
Yeah, I know.
So
I've
just
driven
like
to Arizona before when I came to the Grand Canyon. I actually might be coming again in August.
oh,
Somewhere
that's great.
there.
Yeah, we should catch up.
Yeah, I don't know where I'm going to be ending up because the point is to get from somewhere in California to the Grand Canyon on like a single day. So I don't know which all stops you're going to be hitting. But yeah, let's talk afterwards and see if we can.
Have you been to Grand Canyon before?
I have late December of 2021. But that was like a winter trip, and this is going to be like a summer trip. So that's going to be.
Winters are nice actually. Like you get the snow. I mean, like we Arizonians do not have snow otherwise. So yeah, I mean, like there are places like Flagstaff and all, which will be like good snowy places in winter. But yeah, summers are a different scene. I mean, I've been whenever my friends visit Arizona, I take them to Grand Canyon. So it's been like what 4 or 5 times at Grand Canyon. I'm like done with that scene now.
Of course.
Yeah.
Odia, you can call me. You can either call me Marianne or Dr. Houghton. Just please don't call me Mary.
Yeah, I got that. I did get that feeling.
It's not necessary to ma'am me every time. It's
Yeah, sure. Daphne, so you're like still undergoing your grad, right?
Yep. I'm essentially just starting my second year.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's nice. So
what are you majoring in, Daphne?
My graduate degree is in agricultural and biological engineering. But my undergrad, which I also got at Purdue, was in engineering technology education.
Daphne, thank you for your service with OSTEM.
No problem.
I'm sitting over here quiet. Good morning. I'm in New York. I'm sitting over here quiet because I'm trying to figure out how to add pronouns to my profile, and I can't.
Yeah, I was also trying to figure that out, and I couldn't figure out how to change anything.
Oh, that's interesting. I've got him on my Zoom profile.
Yeah, I think this is a Google Meet thing. I'll have to get on them.
Oh, yeah.
And then I got married, and so technically my last name is Kurtulis now. But because my Google account was made before I got married, now it's, I guess we're just going to be.
A lot of women keep their maiden name for professional purposes because they've established a reputation with their original name.
Yeah, for sure. I just also do some writing under my maiden name, and so like creative writing, and so then I was like, oh, we can have that separate. I'll just start over with teaching with my.
Yeah, you can get an also known as on your passport, so your tickets can be in one name and your ID in another one. Boy, my voice is gravelly this time of morning. Sorry about that.
No, you're good.
I think it's funny that Eric and I are in the same time zone.
Truth.
I'm like the furthest west you can be and still be in Eastern time. I think you can literally like drive 30 minutes and be in Central time. Right on the edge.
I think, Anna, are we good here? Like, okay.
Daphne, any chance I'll see you in Anaheim this fall?
I'm sorry for the delay. Well, actually, there's a small error coming up in the YouTube server as we are trying to stream. So we'll look into it for like 3 more minutes, and if not, we'll be having all our participants on the meet if that's okay with you all.
Or do we want to go ahead like this? Like, I mean, instead of having a YouTube stream, do you just want to go ahead and record the session?
Yeah, we are already recording it. So in case we are not able to live stream it in the next 3 minutes, and definitely we can go with the meet, and we'll be sharing the meet link with the participants. So yeah.
Okay. And then upload the recording later. Okay. Makes sense.
I applied to present at Anaheim with one of my friends. And so we'll see if that happens. But it kind of depends if Purdue will give me funding to go.
Right on. Well, hopefully I'll see you there. I'm going to submit still. They extended the call for proposals till June 30th.
Yeah. So hopefully, and if I get accepted for a presentation, Purdue is much more likely to give me the money to go.
I hear you.
I'd like to go.
Totally hear you.
But we're also going to write some student org grants and see if we can get some wider funding for the whole club.
Awesome. That's part of the reason we have the conference, to help folks get engaged with how to ask for funding.
Yeah. I went to the Professional Development Summit, and that was a lot of fun.
I haven't experienced those, but I'm excited they exist.
Yes, so the live stream is on. So yeah, we could begin slowly.
Okay.
Hi, am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
Hello. So we'll be starting. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. We wholeheartedly welcome you all to the very first pre-event, the virtual roundtable on diversity in emerging technology, conducted as a flagship event to the Neo Dawn Conclave, structured by IEEE CS, RAS, and SPS SBC MACE.
Neo Dawn is an endeavor to foster knowledge in emerging technology and its applications. Once again, we welcome you all. Now handing over to Dia, our moderator for the day. Over to you, Dia.
Thank you, everyone. So, hi, hello, and wishes of a great day, everyone. Welcome to this virtual roundtable discussion by Neo Dawn Conclave, a collaborative initiative of IEEE Marathonicious College of Engineering student branches. The topic for today's discussion is diversity in emerging technology. In this era of unprecedented advancements, emerging technologies like AI, blockchain, augmented reality, and the quantum computing are reshaping industries and societies at a very fast pace. Yet, as we navigate this transformative landscape, it becomes increasingly vital to ensure that the progress we make is inclusive, representative, and embraces the richness of human diversity. Today's discussion serves as a powerful platform to examine the multifaceted dimensions of diversity within the realm of emerging tech. We will explore how diversity encompassing gender, ethnicity, age, culture, and beyond can profoundly impact the development, deployment, and utilization of these groundbreaking technologies. By embracing diverse perspectives, we unlock innovation, challenge biases, and create solutions that benefit all segments of the society. And without any further ado, I shall welcome our esteemed panelists, some of the greatest figures in the face of STEM. I'm very much humbled to be sharing the same platform as them. Just a quick introduction before I get deep into each of your stories. We have with us Marianne Houghton, Eric Patridge, Abhijit Ashok, and Daphne Probert. I welcome each and every one of you to this event. I also welcome our esteemed audience for joining us today over the YouTube live stream, ready to engage, learn, and contribute to this crucial dialogue on diversity in emerging tech. And I am Dia Varghese, Director, Pehya Foundation, who will be the moderator for this discussion. I extend my warmest regards to MACE and IEEE for giving me this greatest opportunity to be part of this great initiative. Now, to begin with, we have our first panelist, Dr. Marianne Houghton, a legendary name in the field of computer science. She's a transgender activist, computer systems architect, internet pioneer, entrepreneur, author, speaker, and I do not know what more I can say to define her. Having very distinguishable contributions as a computer scientist for over 45 years in Unix, enhancing VI, TermCap, Horton's Ed is just worth mentioning. You've had a lot of experience and exposure in research programs at the most distinguished institutions like Berkeley, Bell Labs, Avaya, and Chase, where you kept creating your magic. And the way you call the UN code program as a dumb little program is way too normal, considering it is the foundations of the email attachments that we see today. Dr. Marianne Houghton, it is my privilege to welcome you to this panel discussion.
Thank you so much, Dia. It's great to be here.
Thank you. The journey from Mark to Marianne, I'm pretty sure it was not at all an easy task. It must have been difficult and maybe tiresome at times to navigate through all of that, especially at a time when there was not much of a voice speaking for the LGBTQ community. And these challenges must have been affecting your personal life, your professional life, maybe from the tiniest day-to-day activities to maybe like changing the whole course of your life. And being in a tech field. So how was all of this process? Like being in a tech space, did it add to these challenges or was it making it more easier?
Thank you again. Hello, everyone. I'm Marianne. My pronouns are she and her. I started out very deeply in the closet in the 1980s. I was a closeted cross-dresser. I only cross-dressed in private or with the cooperation of my wife. And it was a time when I didn't dare let anyone know at work that I might be trans or in the family, because that could cause all kinds of consequences. So, making sure that I never I always had to take the nail polish off before I could come into work. I might have been fired otherwise. And that was a time when I never dreamed of letting Marianne exist at work. But in 1996, Bell Labs had turned into Lucent Technologies, and I saw a poster on the wall for an employee resource group called Equal. And it said that its mission was for gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender workers. I'd never seen the word transgender in the workplace before, but that spoke to me. So I showed up to a meeting, and I found out that they were very welcoming. I went to a conference at an Equal conference, and the speakers talked about how important it was for gay and lesbian workers to be out in the workplace, how that made them much happier, much more relaxed, and their productivity increased because they didn't have to spend energy hiding part of who they were. And I wanted to come out too, but I couldn't because there was no equal opportunity policy that said they wouldn't discriminate against transgender people. They did have a policy saying they wouldn't discriminate based on sexual orientation. So I wanted that, and I asked through channels, would it be possible for them to add transgender language to their non-discrimination policy? Now, this was unheard of. There were no large companies with any kind of inclusive language in their policies in 1997. So it was a big ask. And I asked through channels, and eventually through channels came back the answer, well, if we were to add trans-inclusive language to our EO policy, what language should we use in order to be as inclusive as possible? That's a great question to hear. And I didn't know the answer, but I had contacts as an activist. So I asked, and the language that came back was gender identity, characteristics, or expression, where gender identity would protect transsexuals, gender characteristics would protect intersex people, and gender expression would protect pretty much everybody who's not Barbie or Bubba. So that language went up the chain, and in October of 1997, a new EO policy was signed by Lucent that included that language. They said they would not discriminate based on gender identity, characteristics, or expression. And I was over the top happy. So that allowed me to come out at work safely. And I did come out at work, and it was no problem. Management was supportive. My coworkers were supportive. I was more productive at work. It was actually very, very easy. And I think one of the reasons it was very easy was because I was in technology. And in technology, you're judged on how much the computer, how much your code works, how well the computer respects what you typed into it. And computers don't care if you're trans. So it was very easy in technology. It also really helped that I was working for a big company. Lucent was a Fortune 500 company, big, top 500 in the United States. We had a large human resources department. We had a specific person who was the director of diversity in HR. And that any company that's big enough to have a big HR department and a diversity person, it's relatively easy because they respect diversity. It's harder with the family. In my family, it was a lot harder. My wife didn't want me to transition. She was fine with me being out, but transitioning was a problem when I finally did transition, and we wound up splitting up. My parents were impossible. They never did accept me as Marianne, but my kids were great. They were very supportive. However, when I came out, it pushed my kids into the closet because they were school age. My youngest was in middle school, and middle schoolers are tough. So they had to hide who I was in order to accept me, and there were rules. I couldn't come to school or to church as Marianne. So it was harder for them because of me. But my kids are great now. They are fully supportive. Grandkids and everything are totally on board. So life is really good now, but it was challenging back there 25 years ago.
Sure. That's a very, like inspiring story out there. And I particularly want to pick on the point that you said that your productivity was improved because you didn't have to think about anything else. And that's some of the important things that we should be focusing as well when it comes to like people in technology. And I'm pretty sure the audience would also have a lot to pick up from that experience of yours. Now, talking about the experiences of navigating through life circumstances, we have with us Dr. Eric Patridge. Dr. Eric is a data engineer and life scientist in New York who is currently working as a computational principal scientist at Biome, where he focuses on health and wellness solutions driven by AI and ML. He is also the founder and former president of OSTEM, a national nonprofit organization which serves the LGBTQA+ STEM students. Eric, your contributions in your multidisciplinary research is bringing out the genius and the compassionate person that you are. You have contributed a financially sustainable, diverse national society that addresses the needs of underrepresented and underserved students and professionals. Dr. Eric, welcome to the discussion.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for all the work you've done in coordinating this.
Sure. So, science, religion, and sexuality didn't mix as well as I'd hoped they would, quoting your words. How was it growing up as a musician, as an intellect, as a boy, growing up in a typical family, like, your theater camp background, alternate with Summit, OSTEM? How was your childhood, and how has your surroundings helped you what you are today?
Sure. So talking about my childhood, I think it's relevant to talk about my age and like when my childhood was. So I'm 43, and I grew up in Connecticut. Was born around 1979, and experienced the 80s in my youth. Growing up in what I would say is rural Connecticut, which was a very white, predominant white community. We had only one person of color in my entire class, graduating class. I was the only out person in my entire high school. When I was a kid, my family was also very religious. My mom started family mass. We ran, my entire family went to church. I ended up serving on the altar for about 7 years. My brother and my sister also served on the altar. So I grew up in a very conservative environment, and the town is currently voting red, Republican. So it was a challenge, and I spent most of my time actually in theater. I had intended to go into theater and at some point maybe become an actor, or, as children do, they dream. And I was very involved in theater and music and chorus, and that was really my escape from my life, I think, and from my surroundings. So I spent my youth in family, in scouts, in church. It's also relevant that I also, when I was a kid, wore glasses, braces, and headgear. I went into school and was picked on quite often. People would go down the halls and call me names, and they would take their fingers and pull my headgear out of my head and let it go back into my head and cause damage to my mouth. And those weren't the only ways that I was bullied. So when I started coming out in high school, it was a very challenging time. I actually was at the peak of my religious experiences, where I would go to summer religious camp, and I remember bawling my eyes out many times. And it was a delicate path, and I came out to my parents finally in, I believe it was around my senior year. I was doing Fiddler on the Roof, and I was Tevye in Fiddler on the Roof. And it was challenging because my parents were religious, and I remember coming in the house at 4 a.m. after a night out with an LGBT youth group, and my mom, I basically had a lie fall flat on my face, and it was challenging. But my relationship with my family was from there on fairly positive, and has since been extremely ever more positive, right? So every year it gets better. And I would call my entire family like they're all allies for me. They love it. They love me. They're very proud of everything I've done. So to bring that to, I think, what you're trying to get at in terms of how that impacted who I am, I think along the way, I've just always been this empathetic person, and I really care about the people who are around me. And seeing how I was treated and the environment that I came from, and those people who were there for me in little ways, meant a lot when I was a kid. And think it's important that everybody has that, especially when they're in times of need, when they're in a culture of fear. Just having that one person that you can turn to lean on, or to listen, or to smile at you, or to come save you if you're in a conversation and you need an out. Those mean a lot. And another thing that I've learned is that career advancement, I would say, happens more outside the classroom than it does inside the classroom. And a lot of career advancement and advancing professionally happens at water coolers, or over cups of coffee, or at a social event. And we don't learn that in school. And it's important that we have that ability to do that. So I would say all of my experiences sort of brought me to where I am. And along the way, I've learned from friends, I've learned from activism, I've learned from working with activists, those key points. When you see someone who's crying across the room, clearly in trouble, you go across the room and you hug them and you say, what do you need? And those are not necessarily, we're not necessarily born with that. So I think I learned from my surroundings. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, definitely. I certainly would love the point that having good people in the time of your need, and that every year it gets better. So yes, that's like something that really important for anyone, especially in the growing stage when you need like a good person to lean on, to listen to. Thank you so much for your answer. Yes, so definitely your experiences were contributing towards building up the courage and strength in the younger generations. And being part of that younger generation, we have with us Daphne Probert. Daphne is a grad student at Purdue University who's also a highly motivated individual with a passion for STEM education and advocacy for LGBTQ plus people, human rights, and education rights. Daphne is also a knowledge management intern at NASA. Being a queer member, Daphne has had her fair share of struggles to find her way in the field of technology, which she has faced with utmost grace. We are proud to welcome Daphne Probert to the discussion. So, Daphne, you're a grad student at Purdue, a NASA intern, and part of the queer community, who makes sure to make the best movements out there to help with the diversity of the student communities. Now that we have heard about the diversity in emerging technologies, how is it that the representation and diversity is important to you? Like, what does that mean to you as a student?
Yeah, for sure. So, as you mentioned, I'm currently a student at Purdue University, and it's also where I did my undergrad. So I have a lot of knowledge about what goes on there and who to trust and who not to, right? With your problems and with the things that are going on. Something I think it's important to know about Purdue University is that it is considered one of the most accepting and LGBTQ friendly campuses in the United States, which is saying a lot, especially considering it's in Indiana, which is not considered widely as one of the most friendly and accepting states for LGBTQ people. But overall, as a student, my background is also, like you said, in education. I see my status on campus as both a student and a teacher, right? I teach classes, I teach undergrads, but also student body leader. So I'm currently a senator on the Purdue Graduate Student Government, which means that I'm responsible for bringing policy to the wider graduate student body and voting on policy, right? And especially with recent legislation that's been happening in Indiana and a lot across the United States in terms of directly harmful and aggressive legislation being made against both teachers and queer people. I think that it's really important to understand, like, as a queer student and a student body leader, what it means to be involved, right? And what it means to say something. Because I'm in a straight passing relationship. If I didn't want to, I don't have to say anything, right? Like, that is a privilege that I have, that I could continue to live my life being married to a man and watch legislation happen and not say anything. But I recognize that as someone who is in a very friendly university for the most part, and has a very friendly advisor and department and a very, very strong community, it's such a disservice for people to not use that incredible amount of privilege to say something and stand up for the people who aren't in nearly as good of a position, right? Like, I say that Purdue overall is a great place to be. There are plenty of people and professors and advisors who treat their students like crap. Just straight up, I mean, even from an administration level, got terrible, terrible things going on. But for me, I have the ability to say, hey, let's do something about this. This isn't right, and not forfeit my current position as a graduate student or as a teacher or as a senator, right? Which is really, really powerful and not something that everyone can say. So for me, the idea of diversity and representation, what it means to me as a student is lifting up your peers and being able to recognize the problems that are going on around you and being willing to address them, because they're not just someone else's problem, it's everyone's problem, especially when in a collective environment like student body, right? When some people are struggling or some people are being discriminated against, then it's really important for everyone to voice against that, right? And talk about what needs to happen so that we can all be on the same playing field and so that we can all, learn, right? What we're there to do. And as someone mentioned earlier, it's like you can't learn and you can't do your job if you're constantly worried about your well-being or the well-being of your friends, right? And so that's so important and something that doesn't get talked about a lot when we're talking about, why does Purdue need to say something, or why does, this specific organization need to stand up and say something? It's because, well, you have a large student body that can't do their jobs right now, right? Because of an environment that you've created. And so I guess that's why, that's where I think of when I think of representation and diversity as a student, right? Specifically on a college campus and as a grad student, and how to connect that with emerging technologies. It's using your power as a student in collective action with your student body to make sure that everyone has the power to be able to learn and be a part of those learning experiences in emerging technologies.
Sure. Thank you so much, Daphne. I really love the point where you have the power to be a student there and also as a policymaker with the powers that you have to make sure that it's not just you who is able to go ahead with the privileges that you have, but also to make an environment that is not hostile to others as well. Thank you so much, Daphne, for that answer. Last but not the least, we Malayalis too have a student who flew from BITS to Harvard. I welcome Abhijit Ashok, the data scientist with experience across corporate, social, and research arms of data science. He is currently working at Microsoft as a data engineer after his master's in health data science at Harvard. Abhijit has always been very explicit about one's right to expression and how beautifully it can be presented in front of the world. Abhijit, I wholeheartedly welcome you to the discussion.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. And I'm a data scientist. I'm not a data engineer, but that's very slight.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification.
Yeah.
So from BITS Pilani to Harvard and then to Microsoft, that's a great journey. I think that's something that every Malayali out there can be proud of, which reminds me of the headline that I can quote from one of the newspaper, Abhimanatode Mundu Peki Harvard, which translates to going to Harvard in a mundu with pride. Well, mundu is a traditional garment of Kerala. Cultural inclusivity is a very much important topic, like a factor when it comes to the tech field. It culminates, different educational backgrounds, problem-solving skills, and many more. How is this important to you? Or maybe how did you feel on your convocation ceremony recording the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in Malayalam, representing all that you believed in?
Yeah, I would say that it was a very surreal experience for me, and it's definitely tied up like multiple aspects of my life together. You can talk about like my personal passions, the culture that I'm representing, my career, my social life, all of that sort of like came together in that one instance where, you know, I was asked to like go up to the stage and read from the Declaration of Human Rights. And I was asked to read, I believe it was like Article 1, which actually states that all human beings are born equal in dignity and in rights, and which I felt like I fit very well into. And I really wanted to wear a like a munda as opposed to like the usual kurta pajama or like a sherwani, because I feel like those things get like a lot of exposure already when it comes to like the media. If you look at like Hollywood and like all the TV shows that get made here, whenever there's like an Indian representation, you typically see the kurta pajama with like the thing around the neck and all that. So I really want to use that opportunity to highlight a bit more of the South Indian culture or like Kerala culture specifically that doesn't get as much exposure. And I was also like missing home a lot. So it actually felt like being back at home while being at Harvard, which is like a very, very different experience for me. I don't particularly say the statement that people say that, oh, I'm proud of my culture, because I don't think one culture is like superior to another. And I don't think I had anything to do with the way with our culture is today. But I relate to my culture a lot because that's what brought me up. And it's like a very big part of who I am today, especially like the food, the music, and the movies. It's actually fascinating to a lot of people. I've shown a bunch of like Indian movies and Malayalam movies to a lot of people in the community here. We actually have like a monthly event and all organized for that, where people come in for that. And it's not the first time that I was wearing a munda at Harvard. I had worn it once for the Diwali party of the previous year, and again, people had like a lot of questions with like how it's like tied and how it's like staying on there without falling down and all that. And that was also the time when I, since it was Diwali party, I also had like henna and stuff done on my hand and everything. It was like a very, very nice experience. And even during grad school, for my birthday, my colleagues and my professor and I, all of us like went to have dosha in Boston, and it was very interesting. My professor ordered like a paper dosha, which we know that is like humongous. She didn't really know how big it was, but when it came, people had to like move over from one side of the table to another so that her whole dish would like fit on the table. Very, very nice memories like that, introducing people to the different cultural aspects for sure. And I feel like being close to my culture, or sort of like having that part of my culture be permanently like in my mind somewhere in the corner, it definitely makes me grounded, and it definitely makes me rooted. Like wherever I go, it definitely gives me some roots, and that roots sort of like come with me. And when it comes to like tech specifically, I feel like thankfully the tech field is a little bit more open and welcoming to a lot of different, but not a different kind of people. So, but since we're talking about culture, it's definitely welcoming to like a lot of different cultures, because I think people who work in technology really come from like all over the place. And I've never really felt off in the tech field at any point in time. I think I've always been surrounded by people who share some cultural elements, or people who are curious to learn about the cultural elements. At Harvard, though, which is very interesting, I think my program had only like 16 people or so in the entire cohort, and I was like not even like the only Indian person or South Asian person. I was like the only like brown person there in that 16. So, and that was also my first time just living abroad for like an extended period of time as well. Before that, it was just like a couple of visits for like conferences and stuff. So I honestly didn't know how to interact with people who grew up in America. I didn't know how to interact with white people. I didn't know how to interact with Asian American people. But when I was like thrust into that environment, I absolutely had to. Because otherwise I would just be in my own shell in some corner, which can't happen because there's like a lot of work to be done and you really need to like help each other out with it. So I think that experience sort of like forced me to open myself up to learning about different cultures as well, as opposed to like just embracing my own culture and like sitting back. I think that's the other side of it. And I think that really, really helped when it came to like the future years of my life. I'm talking as if it's like too old. It's really not that old. It's just like 2017 to 2019. But it really helped me a lot in the future years of my life when it comes to understanding more people and understanding a lot of things that I didn't know about. I discovered a lot about my own identity, different parts of my own identities after moving here, because of that open interaction and open communication with a lot of different kinds of people. We might get into that at some point later in the event. So in that sense, I would say uh, cultural identity is important in creating those roots. Different people may relate to that very differently, but for me personally, it definitely gives me like a very stable ground to stand on.
Sure. Thank you for that answer. And especially as an international student, I think I relate to a lot of things that you have like told, especially when it comes to like, keeping you grounded with your cultural, where you can use your cultural identity to explore more areas of yourself and you can involve others also in the same. I think that is something very much that I can relate to and a stunning story right out there. And while talking about stories, circling back, Marianne, we cannot move forward without mentioning your recently released memoir, Trailblazer. For everyone out there in the audience, this is a must read. I have secured my copy of the book, and I think you should too. A ton of reviews and feedback from the bestest of the people out there. I know you have been an active voice wherever you have worked by introducing the transgender language into the corporate vocabulary. What do you think should be changed to the corporate sector today to make sure that we exist as an inclusive space? Or maybe, like, better yet, just to put it in a different way, like, how extended should the companies be from just changing the company's logos into the unicorn colors during the Pride Month? Other than that, what should the companies actually do in the corporate space?
Well, Dia, thank you for the kind words about my book. It was a labor of love. Companies out there are focused on business. They have to make money. And to make money, they need productive employees. People need to be at their best. When LGBTQ people are in the closet, they're spending energy hiding part of who they are. So the company needs to create an environment that supports them coming out, being themselves at work, so they can be more productive. That's a business driver, and businesses get that. So businesses have something called employee resource groups, large businesses. These are groups of employees who are focused on one particular minority community. It might be the LGBTQ community, or women, or Asian Americans, or African Americans, or Hispanic Americans, or people with disabilities, or whatever. Different companies have different employee resource groups, but those employee resource groups help direct the energy of the company in ways that are going to be supportive of the particular group, and also supportive of all groups, because the ERGs support each other too. It's not a contest. So companies should support the employees forming employee resource groups. In the case of LGBTQ and especially trans employees specifically, there are certain things that are very important to have in order for those employees to be as productive as possible. The non-discrimination policy, which in America is called the Equal Opportunity Policy, should specifically include sexual orientation and gender identity and gender expression. It's controversial whether it should include gender characteristics at the moment. The intersex community is currently asking for the language sex characteristics in the policy, and that's still being worked out. So having an inclusive EO policy is very, very important. It's critical so people can come out. It's also important for the health benefits policy, the insurance policy that employers, in America at least, your health insurance comes through your employer, and so the employer has a choice about what they're going to cover. So in the 80s and especially the 90s, there was a focus on what we call domestic partner benefits for gay, lesbian, and bisexual employees, where we weren't allowed to marry. So couples would be considered partners, but there would be no legal relationship. And by the policies at the time, typically you had to be married in order to cover your spouse or your partner on your health insurance. So having domestic partner benefits means that your domestic partner, which is like your spouse, but you're not legally married, would still be covered. In the case of trans employees, there was controversy about coverage for gender affirming care. And I called it trans health benefits. These are the medical needs that trans people have in order to transition from one gender to another. It includes counseling, it includes hormones, it includes surgeries, those sorts of things. And those were often excluded explicitly from the benefits policies. So if the company explicitly says we cover this, then that's a big driver to help the trans people be more productive at work, because they're not having to save up their own money in advance to pay for this insurance. It's important also to have a good corporate culture. In other words, you can have policies, but if the employees don't follow the policies, and if the management doesn't support the policies, they're not doing any good. So the best companies will only promote people to management if they're supportive of diversity. That needs to be a requirement to be promoted, or to get good reviews in general, is to be supportive of diversity. And that way, when some diversity issue comes up in the workplace, somebody is a person of difference, whether that be their sexual orientation or their color or their sex or gender or whatever. And if they're getting harassed at work because of that, then the good corporate culture will have the management say, hey, this employee needs to be productive. We support this person, and lay off, don't harass them at work. We need everybody to get along. So that good corporate culture, it can become a norm in the corporation, and that makes a big difference. That's better with the big companies. With the smaller companies, it's harder to accomplish. There's a group in America called the Human Rights Campaign, and they put out a scorecard every year called the Corporate Equality Index. And HRC's Corporate Equality Index is a big carrot, a big driver to help companies improve their policies for LGBTQ people. And I'm sure that other organizations, people of difference, have similar sorts of things. So being labeled a best place to work by the Human Rights Campaign, in other words, getting 100% on the Corporate Equality Index, that's a big attractive driver, and human resources organizations try very hard to reach that 100%. And a lot of companies have succeeded in doing it. So from 1997, when there were 0 companies in the Fortune 500 that had trans-inclusive language in their EO policy, now in the most recent survey, it's up to 91% of those Fortune 500 companies have that inclusive language. In the early days, there were no companies covering the trans health benefits on their insurance. And because of the Corporate Equality Index, now 66% of them have some policy that will cover a trans employee's medical needs. So having a carrot like the Corporate Equality Index really helps the company to improve their policies, to be able to advertise that they're one of the best places to work. And it's become a norm now that any large company, in order to attract the best talent, needs to be inclusive of diversity in general. So corporations need to do all that to focus on their employees, which is different than publicity things involving pride events and rainbows and unicorns. Those can be important too, but that's more of a marketing thing to focus on their customers.
Exactly. That's what I was actually thinking, because I also come with a corporate experience. So after everything, I felt like, are there like actual policies or like actual movements that's being made, rather than for the social media presence, or like rather than for the marketing requirements? So I definitely understand the employee resources, and maybe the all the points that you had told, and a lot of these things I think can be followed by a lot of corporates, even in India as well, which will add to the benefit. And I think like with the more and more newer generations coming up, with the Gen Zs coming up, I think these will be given a lot of more importance when they choose a company for which they think will be better for their career. Now, thank you so much for your answer. Now, Daphne, my next question is towards you. So now this is a little off topic, but I'm sure there is something that nobody would not want to miss, because we do not get to see a NASA intern every once in a while. How was your experience being up there, and how far do you think representation and diversity have been given an importance at such environments?
Yeah, so I can say that I'm currently, knowledge management intern at NASA Langley. I'm virtual, so I work from home, which is great, because that means I can still continue to do research on campus while I'm working part-time. Something that's important, I think, that has kind of spawned from COVID is that there weren't really a whole lot of virtual internship opportunities at NASA prior to COVID, especially because of the very intricate badging requirements and like all the things you have to do in order to get security clearance. So often it's very, very difficult to do that from like a virtual perspective if you or at least hybrid, right? But since NASA, they had to, there's a big transition where all the workforce, right, had to be virtual, which meant kind of a change in some of the security regulations, and made it easier for people to who were not directly living in a city that has a NASA center to get involved. And so last year I started working in knowledge management, which is essentially making sure that best practices are like communicated, but also stored, right? Like that I said, well, if you transition to fully in person, or if this internship had been fully in person, I would not have been able to do this. Because you're talking about, I mean, I live in Indiana, moving to Virginia, which is where Langley is, getting a lease for 3 months, paying 2 leases, right? One in Indiana and one in Virginia, and then moving back, and I have right now a husband, a dog, right? So just something that's completely inaccessible for me and most people, I would think, right? To just kind of upend your life and move somewhere for a couple months, especially places that have high costs of living, like where Langley is, or any of the other NASA centers, right? A lot of them have pretty high costs of living. And on top of this, there was a big problem last year with people who were going in person of incredibly predatory housing. And so people that were getting housing that was way, way, way above market rate because it was the only thing available, or they were being forced to sign leases for like several months longer than they would live there because it was the only option. Like there was a significant amount of people that were like living in their cars. And that's terrible, like absolutely awful stuff. And making an internship virtual, or at least having a hybrid option, I think opens the doors to so much more talent, right? And more availability, and is really way more accessible for a wide majority of people. I worked with a lot of high schoolers, actually, which I thought was really interesting, who were from the surrounding area. And to me, I could not imagine in high school, right? Like in grad school, it's one thing, it's still hard, but maybe doable. In high school, moving like halfway across the country to like go do an internship for a couple months, like that, that sounds crazy, right? And so that's why I told my mentors, I said, like, if you want to continue to have diverse talent and talent that is not, rich people who can afford to do this and have the resources to do this, then you're going to have to maintain a virtual or at least hybrid format, because like it's just so inaccessible. So now this year I get to be there virtually, which is great, and continue that work. But I think from like a large perspective, one, if you're looking at like grad students and interns and hiring and stuff like that, like in order for something to be accessible, you need to be able to have flexibility, especially since there's not a small portion of grad students who are married and or have families. And so, like I said, they can't afford to just kind of uplift their lives and move somewhere for a couple months. But also like people with disabilities, right? Like it's super important to be able to have that flexibility to work from home sometimes. And then also like paid internships, right? Like can we go do away with the unpaid internships? So inaccessible and so crappy to do. Which I will say, NASA does have unpaid internships, so don't accept it just because it's NASA, okay? Like you can still get taken advantage of. So don't let them do that to you. And even like I worked at Lawrence Berkeley National Lab like 2 summers ago, and it was virtual because during COVID, so I didn't have to move. But I did not get paid on time. Like any paycheck I got, not a single one was on time. And I think my final paycheck was 2 or 3 months late, which is like was completely legal, right? That they could do this because we weren't technically interns. We were like paid contractors or whatever the special term is that means that they don't actually have to pay us when they say they do. And so it's like, if people often ask, like, what can we do? Other than actually paying people and actually committing to, real accessibility changes for people from all walks of life. It's like, oh, do you want us like to give you more merch? We can do that. It's like, no, I want you to like actually pay me and pay me on time and pay me what I deserve. And then also give me the flexibility to be a human being, right? Whether that's being able to take some time off. So also when I worked at Lawrence Berkeley, technically I wasn't allowed to take any days off, which is like absolutely insane. It's the summer, right? I have other stuff going on in my life. Like I might have, medical emergencies, whatever, really. Stuff happens. And I think even at NASA, technically I have stipulations about what time I get to take off. But my mentor is really good about just working with me and making sure that I get done when I need to get done. So I think that these are like really clear, better policies for everyone, right? Not just marginalized communities, but like everyone, right, deserves to get paid on time, deserves to get paid what they're worth, and deserves to have the flexibility and be treated like a human.
Sure. Thank you so much. So definitely the best thing, I think one of the best things that came out of COVID is the ability to work virtual rather than being in person. Definitely that has helped a lot, and in increasing the diversity as well, because as you told, it helps a lot of people with maybe like disability who have a lot of different setup at their house, whatever. It definitely helps a lot of things, and definitely all the points that you said about getting paid and being able to live like a human while being an intern. So I still don't get why the weird thing about why interns do not have a pay time off while they are working. There are a few things that still maybe like needs a reality check on. Definitely, thank you for your answer. So now I have my next question for Dr. Eric Petrich. So the best thing about OSTEM that I could find was the member resources that you guys provide, like the educational aids, like to educate and help people address the questions that one might have, like to be a good ally. For example, the usage of pronouns, how to create a gender inclusive survey, or maybe like how to advocate for a gender inclusive restroom. This is something that may be very much appreciated because educating part is something that is not really common, and there is an evident lack of that in the society as well. How have you felt the need for this education is relevant in the technical workspace? Or what are the ways that you think are like the most effective when it comes to educating the other people?
Yeah, and thank you so much for your question. So I'm a strong believer in changing or trying to transform the infrastructure as we move through it, because therefore the infrastructure is better for the people who come behind you. From that perspective, education is always important, because it's impossible to know everything. It's impossible to know everything about every culture around the world, right? And even from that perspective, I try and practice it in my daily life. So you mentioned pronouns. I should say, because I haven't yet, my pronouns are he, him. I also use they, them, and I use that intentionally because I want to provide that educational opportunity. Because people right now, especially, are having a lot of questions around these things, right? So I also use them at work. I'm the only person who includes them on my profiles at work, and I get those questions. I get the questions from, our billionaire CEOs. Why do you have pronouns? What do they mean to you? And it provides those educational opportunities. And I think your question is also geared towards technical application in terms of how does this apply to your work product? And I would say it starts with cultural competence, including how you treat people, but also learning about their needs. And this is extremely important for creating collaborative workspace and inclusive solutions, as well as reaching potentially VIPs for your company. And each of those are important for technical. And the reason I say that is from the collaborative workspace, your colleagues are not necessarily going to be able to contribute their 100 or 110% if they don't feel like you are, if you're invested in them, if you care about them. If you're creating this opportunity for them to feel and not have fear and experience the workplace at their best, they're more likely to give you 100, 110%. So that's where I would say that technical input from your colleagues is important. Now, inclusive solutions specifically, when you provide that educational conversation with somebody and you're open and able to interact with people, you learn a lot. And those opportunities where you learn allow you to plan and engineer your solutions to a more wide-reaching audience. And it's more likely that your code and your products are going to need less refactoring and be more ready for productization if you're able to serve your company in the best way. And so I would say inclusive solutions are immediately served by educating your coworkers and learning from that opportunity. And then in terms of reaching VIPs, VIPs can often be high level investors who are immediately interested in engaging in your products, or donors, or just straightforward investors. And if they hear your inclusive nature and they latch onto it, they might be more likely to support you, because investors don't support a company or product, they support teams. So in those ways, I think cultural competence and education are extremely applicable in many different ways to technical workspace. So it's straightforward that every person will need this kind of education at some point in their life. It's also needed, so from a different lens, from a technical workspace, very oftentimes you'll see that the DEI material, if you're not in the DEI space, will be more applicable when you're coming from a task-oriented perspective as well. So in some cases, you'll be putting together content for customers, or solutions or surveys for customers, and then you have to figure out, well, how am I gonna word this for customers? How are they gonna best understand it? And that depends on what you're doing, but also who are the people, what are the opportunities that you want to put into your data. So I work at a company that does AI and ML, and it might take a while for the data to come in, but if we're not asking those questions now and allowing people to identify, then we're not going to have that data for AI and ML in 5 years when we do have that data. So some of it is also laying the groundwork so that we can fix the problems that exist today at some later date. Let me see if there's something else I wanted to offer here. I think that covers your question. So I'm happy to take in a different direction, but thank you very much.
Sure. Thank you so much. I just love how you said that you would love to change the infrastructure as we go on so that the people behind us can make use of that. I think that's the major, I mean, like the foundations of how we should be educating the coming generation as well, and how it can take up the world to a better space. Thank you so much for that answer. Now, Abhijit, I have listened to your talks, and boy, I must tell you, you are a very good storyteller. As a data scientist, being able to tell a story, I think, is one of the most, like in an exciting way, is the best thing, and that's a win for you. What would be your story? Maybe like a thread that defines you the most. Like a story that makes you the ally to the diversity and the right to express yourself.
Very good question, actually. I wouldn't say it's just one thread. I would probably call it out as like multiple threads coming in to create something like a compound fabric or something of the sort. One of them is probably my own journey with data science itself. It started back in like 2014, and the very next year, I was still learning about data science and what it can be used for and what are the applications of it. And the very next year, I started collaborating with this nonprofit that used data as like a means to combat gender-based violence. And that was the first time I was seeing data being used for social justice in general, like social upliftment in general. And that sort of like opened up a lot of doors for me in the sense that my view about like data and the applicability of data itself was very narrow. I mean, for me, data was career, data was education, and social justice issues were like a whole other stream of life in itself. But them coming together was like a very big eye opener for me. And personally, being the person who was dealing with the data, I had to like actually read through reported incidents of and experiences of gender-based violence of people, and that was like, it was hard to read through. I will definitely say that. But especially as like a cis man who has the privilege of like not having to go through a lot of those things. It was also like very, very eye-opening for me personally to read through all of that. And I think that is like a very big thread that opened up a lot of doors and windows for me. And then the other one would probably be my journey with like feminism and gender equity in general. And I trace it back to starting in 2012, which is like the first instance that I remember when I realized my male privilege. I realized that I had male privilege. Up until then, I was kind of like living in a well, I think. People ask me about like what was the trigger, and I tried so hard to like think back and identify what actually triggered it. I just don't have something to call out as a trigger. Just one fine day, in my college hostel, I just like woke up and I was looking out through the window, and somehow it just like hit me that the world is really like unfair and balanced in like a gender space, and I have a lot of male privilege, and took a lot of time to digest it. And the first instance was like, okay, what do I do with this information? Like it was like the entire like life and perspective that was like built up in me by the society was like breaking down, and I had to like figure out what exactly this means to me and where I wanted to like take this knowledge forward. And that started in 2012, and it's still like continuing even today, and it's probably never going to end. And I think that's like a very big thread that also like defines me for sure. Another one would probably be that I am a consensually non-monogamous or a polyamorous person. I don't know how many people listening to it actually knows what it is, but if you don't, do look it up or just like talk to me later, and I'm happy to like talk to you about what it is and what it means to me. That journey started in like 2007. It was like a very natural thing to come to me, and it was a lot of people call it out as like a choice, as like a choice that they make to how they want to like live their life and what kind of lifestyle they want to adopt. For me, I think it's a very important part of my identity as well. Like I used to, for the 10 years after 2007, until I actually got to know that this is like an actual real world legitimate thing, and it's not something I'm dreaming up and there's nothing wrong with me. It took 10 years to identify that. But in those 10 years, I definitely do remember being very suffocated in situations where I wasn't allowed to be that way, socially not allowed to be that way. So that's like its own journey, and now I've definitely like learned a lot by interacting with like multiple communities and like identifying where I fit into those puzzle pieces and everything. And then once I got to Microsoft, there's the employee resource groups, as we've already talked about in the event. I served on the board of the queer employee resource group of Microsoft for like a year. And very briefly also served on the board of the ERG for ethical non-monogamy before I had like stopped because of health reasons. But they were also like very eye-opening into what corporate culture offers. I mean, we've already talked about that quite a bit, about what corporate culture offers, the corporate culture that I'm part of, like offers for inclusivity, especially like the E&M ERG. Like I was really surprised to even find out that that actually existed, because that's not really something you see in a lot of places. And I felt very much at home. And it's not like two people just like meeting up every now and then talking either. They're like a really good like 150 to 200 people on there in the Microsoft E&M ERG. And then when I got to Harvard, there was this tag of the person of color tag. That was not something that I had ever been used to. Growing up in India, that's not really a tag that you hear, because I guess pretty much everybody is like a person of color. But when I got to Harvard, I think it took me a little bit of time to correlate and understand the fact that I am a person of color as well. I still remember even before classes started, I went in and we got this like emailer about this POC lunch, a lunch that Harvard was hosting specifically for the new incoming students of color. I remember just like reading the title and just like scrolling down further, and then after like a minute, I was like, wait a minute, that's me. Like that POC is like supposed to be me. And I went up and I read the details, and then I went in, and then the whole idea regarding person of color is not so much about like the literal view of like how that person looks, but it's so much about like their racial origins and everything, right? Because initially I thought that East Asian people wouldn't be counted as person of color because they really have like much fairer skin, but then I got to know that that's really not what it's about. And that identity has definitely prompted me to go into a lot of different other directions, including identifying specific POC experiences within the non-monogamy community, which I think is also like something that doesn't get talked about too much. So like there's like, I don't think it's like one single thread. I think it's like a lot of different threads coming. It's almost like Captain Planet. I don't know if you've ever seen that cartoon earlier. It's like you need earth, fire, wind, water, and heart to make Captain Planet. And even if one of those lose up, you're really not going to get the same end result. And that's kind of like the way, I'm not saying I'm Captain Planet, but I'm just saying that's the correlation I'm making to like explain what each of those stories mean to me.
Sure, thank you so much. That was a wonder. As I told earlier, you are a good storyteller and you know your way around that.
Appreciate it.
So, and also, I think the best thing that I liked about it is that how your exposure to technology exposed yourself into a lot more of things. And I think that is like, like a lot of, I think that's kind of like what we all want in the end, to make this place a better place, world a better place. And, like have the social justice that we want. Maybe like all the solutions that we are sorting for is towards that direction itself. So thank you so much for that. So now, I think my next question is coming back to Marianne. So while talking about your movements, transgender healthcare has been one of your major advocates. And I think we did touch this point earlier in your answer. And I could see that you have performed vast research into knowing how many transgender people is out there like seeking the surgeries and what it would actually cost. And I could see like two of your major research papers on the same as well. So how far do you think the HR policies have come across to accommodate these findings? Like I think in a country like India, we did talk about this, like, like in a healthcare system where, the gender reassignment surgeries or maybe the hormones and everything can be elective. And these are like not being covered a lot in the medical plans. I think a lot of your research results can be like a good insight into that's happening in that sector.
Well, thank you for the question. Back in the 90s, it was widely claimed that the costs would be tremendous if they were to cover it on their insurance plans. it was expected that it would bankrupt companies. And nobody really had any numbers about this. It was just being claimed. But Lynn Conway put out a position paper, sort of a back of the envelope analysis that suggested that it really wouldn't cost that much. But we didn't have any really good numbers. So I thought, well, there aren't that many surgeons that trans people go to. And I could survey those surgeons and I could probably get some pretty good numbers. So I did a survey in 2001 of all the surgeons that Americans go to in any kind of number. There were only 15 of them. The surgeons weren't all in America, but this was focused on US residents that were the patients receiving these surgeries. And I asked them, how many surgeries did you do in 2001? And what did you charge and what fractions were Americans, so that I could do the math. And of those 15, I got an astounding response from 13 of them, which is a tremendous response rate. And what I found was that there were 1,170 surgeries approximately done on Americans in 2001. That was about 740 male to female and about 430 female to male. And so the incidence of the surgery in any given year was about 1 in 240,000, which is very low. It was more than thought, but the number in any given year was very small because you only do a surgery once in your lifetime. It's not something you do every year. We had an inherent prevalence of about 1 in 2,000, which means that over the course of people's lifetimes, about 1 person out of 2,000 would have a gender transforming surgery, which is a lot higher than we thought. That's 0.2% of people, which is surprisingly high. But the cost still wound up being very low. And the reason for that is that there's a Benjamin scale about how transgender people are. There's at one end of the spectrum, people could be a Benjamin 6, which means they want the surgery and they want to live full time in the opposite gender. And at the other end of the spectrum, a 0 is people who aren't trans at all. And a 1 might be somebody who maybe cross-dressed for Halloween once and got something out of it. So in the 1990s, a couple of doctors did a survey. It was called the Janice survey, Dr. Janice and his wife, Dr. Janice. And they surveyed people on their sexual habits. They were asking all kinds of very, very personal questions about their sex habits. And in the middle of this survey, they asked them, have you ever cross-dressed? And 3% of the women and 6% of the men said, yes, I have. So that gives you a floor on how many people are transgender at any level on the scale, even Benjamin 1, that 3 to 6% of the population is trans at some level. So when you hear about an epidemic of teenage girls coming out and using they, them pronouns now, it sounds like there's this big cultural change. But what I think is really going on here is these people might be Benjamin 1s, and they're exploring this new non-binary option that was not available before. So they're sort of trying it on for size. And they might be trans in a very, very limited sense, but that doesn't mean they're going to transition to the opposite sex. That's only the tip of the iceberg of people who really fully transition. So in addition to those demographics, I was able to look at the cost. And the cost was astoundingly low because the number of people getting surgery in any one year is 1 in 240,000. So even if a surgery cost $10,000 to $15,000 in 2001, and by the way, these costs are from 2001, so you would double them for today's numbers. The cost for the surgery worked out to 5.3 cents per insured. And if you add in the cost for the mental health counseling and the hormones and the lab tests to support the hormones, the total cost per insured worked out to 17.3 cents out of a total healthcare cost of about $4,000. So that worked out to 0.04%. And that number, 0.04%, holds steady. The Anderson Institute at UCLA did a study recently that also suggested it's about 0.4% for the military. And 0.04% is the number. That's basically a rounding error. So the cost to include it in insurance, because it's a rounding error, they don't add anything. They use the number 0. So when, in fact, one of the questions that came up, and I don't have the data to support this, I've never seen a survey to support it, is that if you cover the benefits on your health plan, then the mental health costs, which are also typically part of the health plan, the cost to do counseling for people will go down, because trans people who are dealing with depression or anxiety or other mental health issues that have to do with being a closeted trans person or a trans person who can't transition, those are mitigated. Those tend to go way down if you have the freedom to transition. So there's suggestion that there might actually be cost savings, because the mental health savings might outweigh the tiny cost for the medical benefits. We don't know for sure. We don't have data to support that, but that hypothesis is out there. So the bottom line is that we know that any decision of whether to cover the benefits or not cover the benefits, it's not based on cost. It's based on politics, or it's based on the personal opinions of the people making the decision, or it's based on the law in some cases. So it's not a cost thing, and that fact has had a huge impact on today's politics, because in America you're hearing from a lot of anti-trans people that are passing laws that say you can't provide health care. And none of them are saying that this is because it's too expensive. The cost of it does not enter into the conversation anymore. And 20, 25 years ago, the cost was the main driver. Now it's entirely based on politics. So the numbers are very tiny, and I was able to show that the numbers were very tiny. I gave workshops at Out and Equal throughout the 2001 or the 2000s decade, and showed what the costs were. We had a fun workshop where we would bring people up and show them the various drugs and do a Price is Right kind of thing, having them guess the cost of the different drugs. And it turns out the drugs are all very, very inexpensive. They're way less expensive than many other drugs that are out there. And the surgeries aren't that expensive compared to some of the other kinds of surgeries that are commonplace today too. So because of those workshops, the word got out that, hey, this is not a very expensive thing to do. And that's one of the reasons that so many companies today, 66 to 67% of companies are covering it on their health benefits today, because they know it's not going to cost them anything significant.
Sure. I think like a lot of work that you have put into this area is worth mentioning, and I'm pretty sure a lot of the people out there are benefiting from the same as well. And I feel like it's just not for American corporate background. I think this applies to the Indian sector as well, where there is a $1 million business happening, where the politics gets involved in the policy decision making, and rather than the cost and everything. And I did get a sneak peek of the fun workshops that you were talking about somewhere around when I was looking you up. And I have heard that that was pretty much successful in creating a great awareness in this. Thank you for all the work that you have been doing out there.
It's been a pleasure.
So thank you so much. Sure. Now, healthcare definitely consists of a lot of usage of data, and I think almost all of our panelists have been working with that kind of area. Not just data, but a lot of interdisciplinary subjects contribute, towards upgrades in healthcare. So, Eric, my next question is towards you. So, you have been known for your ability to cultivate and apply multiple disciplines so expertly and fluently. I have read that you believe that community, social advancement, and intellectualism can only happen when intellectualism isn't goal, when it's inclusive and compassionate. Your words. Being a data scientist, having to work with data in a major share of your time, having data-derived solutions in the AI ML field, how far do you think the data that we are using is like inclusive, or like maybe like, do you think the AI solutions that we put out of the world is a little biased because of the bias that we have in the data? Do you think so? And maybe like a follow-up question towards that, have you had any experiences where you have made a better, have received a inclusive input from yourself or maybe from a team member that made the solution better? I know there's a lot of questions out there.
Yes. So if it's okay, I'm going to answer the second question first, because I think that one's going to be shorter. So I work in a really cool team in New York City. My boss, I think, is from Mumbai. I have someone on my team who works under me from Mumbai. And I can tell you for sure that bringing an inclusive mindset and being there to help whatever my colleagues need makes our technology better. And the reason I know this is so the person on my team who I'm speaking about, who's from Mumbai, joined my team last May, and we're supporting his immigration process. And so that requires input from me in regular meetings, figuring out how we're going to support in different ways. And I think that's so important. And I can tell you that the technology that we built together over the last year is incredible, and it wouldn't have been possible without him. And I'm 100% sure that he's putting in so much effort because he cares about what we're doing, but he also cares about our team and our company. So, and I would not have been able to do what we're doing without him. So in that way, I would say just bringing the inclusiveness from my colleagues, right, and making sure that my teammates are cared for is making our technology better. And in addition, we all have great conversations and we're able to collaborate, and I'm out to them, and we're able to hone in on that code and say, well, let's think about how we're doing this section of code, and let's think about how to serve these other needs. Now, from the AI perspective, 100%, it's like most data out there, 99.99% of data out there is biased. And that's going to be true for a long time because it's not going to be solvable in the near future, especially with the fact that, and this is something I believe we are experiencing, and I think the whole world has experienced since the pandemic, science is political. And because of that, we are not going to experience an inclusive data collection culture for several years to come. And until we have that inclusive data and we're able to train on that inclusive data, sure, I would say most AI and ML out there is going to be biased. And the only way to change that is to dedicate yourself to doing so, is to say, am I collecting the data that I need in 5 years to make an inclusive change? Right? Am I asking the questions that I should be asking? Because 5 years down the road, you might look at the data you thought was inclusive and it's not. So it's a long haul to figure out how to fix this. And it's going to involve people in politics. It's going to involve the technical people who are actually applying those coding changes or those data engineering solutions. And it's going to require connections to the people who we need to actually be surveying, right? So it's going to require a holistic community to figure out how to make AI and ML unbiased.
Sure, that might take years of inputs and work behind, but I think we hope that we reach that point. This is like actually this is kind of like a topic of interest to me as well, because I think a couple of years back I also started thinking into the same, because I think that was like when I started looking into data science as well. Like, this is affecting the solutions that we get. So yeah, I think like like when we make sure that real inclusivity is being profound in the emerging tech, I think better solutions come out from. And it starts from the beginning, like from the ideas, from how the ideas were formed in the first place, maybe from the little brains that made these ideas. So Daphne, my question is to you. You have immense experience as a certified teacher as well for like high school students as well. So how much do you think the kids in school level are like aware of the concepts of the importance of being inclusive and welcoming to each other? Like might be like mid school or high school. These are the times where it can be a little hard for a student growing up in different ways as well. So do you think these little brains have already been filed with these toxicities? Or maybe what can be the measures that we can do? Or what are the reasons that can happen, or what are the measures that we can do to make sure schools are a safe place for students by ensuring the inclusivity?
Yeah, so this is a very important question in my mind. Like I said before, being a queer person and a teacher in Indiana, they just passed several laws requiring teachers to out students if they're informed of their anything relating to not presenting as their biological sex. Like technically, teachers in Indiana are now required to report that to their parents, and that includes going by a nickname that may or may not be, associated with biological sex, or wearing something that may or may not be associated with their biological sex, which is absolutely absurd, right? Because these are all made up. That means that, like, if one of my students came in and he was wearing a pink shirt, right, I'd be required to report that to his parents, right? Like, oh, did you know that your son was wearing a pink shirt today? That's what women do, right? Absolutely crazy stuff. So the idea of what does it mean for school, like what role do schools have and what roles do teachers have, is a very common question as people, especially teachers in Indiana, are considering right now. When I taught high school, which I should specify that I taught high school for a semester as part of my student teaching formally, but I have done a lot in informal education with first robotics, and also I worked at the library doing public community STEM programming. So like I have more experience in informal education and specifically undergraduate teaching at the present moment than I do teaching high schoolers. But I can say in like the one semester that I was student teaching, I had 4 or 5 students come out to me. But I was a student teacher. I was not, a full-time, a person that was there. I mean, I was full-time there, but right, I'm not a full employee in the school. I'm there with a cooperating teacher that I'd help and lead the class the majority of the time, but it's still not fully my classroom, right? And yet, like, I was the person that these students felt like the need to talk to me, right, about what was going on with their lives. And the majority of them did not have good relationships with their parents about it, right? And or specified they did not want me to use their preferred name or preferred pronouns in front of their parents. And so if that had been this year, right? This was a year ago that happened. So like if I were doing that right now, my licensure would be under risk because these students felt comfortable telling me about the struggles that they were dealing with. And so it's a lot. It's heavy. And I think that when I was teaching high school, a lot of the kids were good about exploring, what they wanted to, what they were feeling and what they wanted to try out, right? So I was always eager to, use preferred names, preferred pronouns. And I was also fine if they changed, right? It's cool. People are still learning who they are, all the time, even me, right? And so, but some of the other teachers did not have nearly as easy a time as that, right? Or sometimes make disparaging comments of like, oh, like now they're going by they, them. So like, it's all, made up or whatever. And it's just kind of like, well, it costs nothing, right? It costs nothing for you to just give them this, right? Give them dignity. They want to go by a certain name. They want to go by certain pronouns. Just do it. It literally costs you nothing to do that. And if they tell you that they're not comfortable doing that in front of their parents, like that should be fine too. If I don't call a kid's parents when he wears like an inappropriate shirt to school, then I'm definitely not going to call the kid's parents when they ask me to use a nickname, right? So it's all very complicated, especially where I live right now. And then at the college level, it's a lot. Things are a lot smoother in my experience. A lot more inclusive classrooms. A lot of people who are eager to find community and do it. And I consider my classroom to be a very inclusive space. And I'm pretty open about the fact that I'm involved in a lot of queer organizations on campus. And so some of my students have had conversations with me about that. We've done some activism together. But I've not had nearly as many problems as I had at a high school level of having to be like, hey, can we not say that from both like students and teachers? So it's very difficult. But I think that like the main thing that you can do, right, as an educator is just like consider your students as people and complex people who have emotions and feelings and maybe don't know exactly what's going on with them right now, but that's okay. You don't either. So you can work with them and treat them like they're complex adults just like you are. And if they ask you to do something that's worth so, like it takes so little effort from you, like do it. Why would you debate about it? And yeah, I just think it's it's a lot. Currently in Indiana, but that is why I'm moving. Fun fact, after I graduate. But I really like just making safe spaces for your students and making sure that they feel comfortable to be themselves. And when they do ask you to call them by a certain name or certain pronouns or anything like that, like you don't need to ask them why. You don't need them to prove anything to you. You just need to do it. Simple as that.
Sure. Being there for them and, like being supportive at a young stage can be something very, maybe very much required for any student at that young age. And I'm so happy to hear that there was a lot of students who really wanted to, consider you more trustable person than their parents, maybe, which is a good thing because, at that age, there should be at least like someone to be there. I remember the words of Eric, who said that you had those people when you were young as well. So I think that goes for everyone as well. So thank you, Daphne. Now, not too far from the topic, but another one of the inclusivities in the field of STEM is the financial inclusivity. So Abhijit, so me being an international grad student in USA knows how much it is important to be, like financially stable at times to reach some far-fetched dreams. How did it look for you when you started out on your education? Also, like, do you think like the financial differences in the society affect the opportunity reach for each individual?
Yeah, I think it's like extremely financial. The aspect of finance when you talk about like inclusion and diversity, it's an extremely important factor, one that's often overlooked as well, I would say. Personally, for me, like we didn't really have like a lot growing up. It definitely got steadily better over time, and I'm actually really thankful for that. But even as like a kindergartner, I still remember our house was this like tiny 2-room house, really far in from like the main road, and we didn't really have any mode of transportation at that time, like not even like a bicycle or something. So I remember as like a little kid, my dad or mom, whoever was there, they would like come to the bus stop, just like pick me up, and then starts like this long walk home, which probably took like half an hour, like an hour even, after school. And then same thing in the morning, just like walk back as well. And then eventually I think the family saved enough to buy like a scooter. And this was like, I don't even know if you know the scooter. It was the TVS Sunny, which is probably like the smallest scooter ever existing. So we had like one of the base models of like one of those. And eventually that sort of like grew up into like better modes of transportation and like better apartment and whatnot. So it just steadily got better over time, and I'm really thankful for that. But I think being born into financial stability, it does make a lot of difference. Eventually, at BITS, when I finally got to BITS, my parents did manage to send me to BITS without actually taking like an education loan for it, which was very impressive. Personally, I think it was very impressive on their part. They probably like squeezed out everything they had to make that happen. But it was like really impressive on their part. But then even when I got to Harvard, even with like the fellowship and everything I got, it still ended up being like a big amount because like Boston being like really expensive city. And even if you had like savings from India, the conversion rate really doesn't really make that very helpful. And you know what I'm talking about. So essentially that left me like this huge loan, but thankfully I was also in like a career field that really paid quite well, and I was able to like pay that back really fast, which is again not a privilege that a lot of other people have. And I would say that financial constraints affecting exposure is very, very real, and not just in terms of like getting education, but even for entrepreneurship. Like if you really if you really have a cool idea that you want to work on, and you think that's going to be really, really impactful and very helpful to the world, a lot of people hesitate to even do that because they don't have like a fallback. If you come from money, like if you're born into like a family that's already like really financially stable and well off, you have that freedom to like pursue your dreams. So even if it doesn't work out, there's always something to like fall back on and like you start right back up again. Most people in the world don't really have that privilege, and you have to like think about how many really cool ideas and how many cool products are just living in people's minds right now because there aren't like the financial resources to back them up. And I feel like it's not just like something that affects experiences independently. It also has like some far-reaching implications across life as well, because it's not like if you couldn't get like a really good primary education, that doesn't stop, and a new chapter doesn't begin from where that stopped, where you're like, oh, okay, fine, I didn't get like a great primary education, let me go ahead and get myself like a really good college education. A lot of people do that, sure, but that's not like the expected. But it's not like a video game where you can just like start over all over again, right? Because if you don't get like a good primary education, that basically means your exposure is affected. And if your exposure is affected, you're not really exposed to all of the possibilities that you can have going forward. And if you're not exposed to all of those possibilities you can have going forward, you can't even think of like all of the things that you can do with your own potential. First of all, understanding your own potential is like its own challenge. But even if you do understand your potential, what all can you do with that potential is also affected if you don't have that kind of exposure. So, and all of this like ties down to finance. And if you ask what is the reason for such financial disparities to exist, we got like really talk about other differences like race and ethnicity, and other cultural backgrounds that people come from, colonialism for that matter. That's like a very big one. And so I don't think we can talk about finance as a silo. And once you talk about finance, you got to like really talk about all of these other issues that it branches out to. But I think it's like really, really a very important aspect. One of the biggest things that affect people's exposure to like education and like a good career in general. Personally, I think both healthcare and education, it's like high time they should be like open and covered for all, like universal healthcare and universal education. I definitely feel like it's high time we have that. How to make that logistically happen in this clusterfuck of the world, pardon my language, that's like a whole other discussion in itself. And hopefully, just like the gender bias in data, which is actually like a really good thing that Dr. Patridge called out, there was this paper that came out from Microsoft Research in 2016 that actually gained some popularity. I don't remember it exactly, but it was something about they were testing out the gender bias in data, where they trained I believe they trained like an AI to identify like word associations, and then they gave the word association man and programmer together to the AI, and then gave it the word woman and asked it to like bring out the word association that it would give to it, and it came up with homemaker as the word association, and that was like their way of like proving how biased data in itself is. And the paper was all about like introducing a few mathematical concepts that could help correct some of that gender bias in data. But ultimately, we definitely have like a long way to go before correcting any of this, and one can only hope that we're inching forward in the right direction, at least, albeit like very, very slowly.
Sure, sure. Thank you so much for being honest with us. And, like you have touched a lot of points which are very important and very, very relevant conversations. Now that we have traversed through like the different planes of diversity in the emerging tech, I bet the audience also has a lot of questions. Now is the time that the audience can go ahead and put up your questions in the live chat, and I shall be forwarding the questions to the panelists as well. So as of now, we have a question coming up for Dr. Eric Patridge, and the question is that what role can educational institutions play in fostering diversity in STEM fields, particularly in relation to emerging technologies?
So that's a really challenging question. And the reason I say that's really challenging is that academic institutions, from my experience, have not done a wonderful job of bringing technology into other domains in general. With that problem aside, right? So let's assume that's not a problem. I would say that fostering those communities on the campuses for each academic institution is extremely important, because this is the time where they can experience those shared time and places with each other to learn who they are, to find out who they are professionally inside, and bring that forward. And that is going to be extremely important when they come out and try to find a job and engage with people in their own community, outside of their community, in their interviews, to give them that confidence to pursue their passion and their dreams. So I would say providing that platform and that space for those students to explore themselves. And if I had to return back to the tech, I would say academia could do a lot more to synergize collaborations between their siloed disciplines, to bring technology into those disciplines. Biology could have more technology, chemistry could have more technology. And I think that is also another area that needs to happen, and it will impact each and every student.
Sure, definitely. I would also like to bring up
sorry, I was like, I actually have
ahead.
something to add to that too. From like even like lower than higher education, right? From like a high school, middle school perspective, I think that we put a lot of stress on teachers and also like one size fits all programs, right? Of like, our students aren't prepared for the workforce. Right? That's like kind of my whole undergrad, right? Is workforce development, engineering, technology, education, CTE, whatever you want to call it. Students aren't prepared, so let's introduce them to programming at a younger age. Let's get AI in the classroom, right? Let's do all these things. But what isn't being said is like, let's train the teachers so that they know how to do these things, right? So that they can actually teach their students. And I think that when companies are looking for ways to form a robust workforce development pipeline, the easy answer is get your teachers in there, right? So train your teachers off, and I'm not talking like thousands of dollar programs, right? Because those plenty of those exist. Like, come take our magical program. It'll cost you $5,000 per teacher per class, and we'll teach you how to magically make all of your students like experts in engineering. Like, that doesn't work, right? That's not how any of that works. And on top of that, it's like, if you want to form that pipeline, you have to pay for it. Schools can't pay for it. The teachers certainly can't pay for it. You have to pay for it, and you have to put your resources where your mouth is if you want the benefits. There's also plenty of amazing programs that are run almost entirely by volunteers. So like, I love First Robotics. I'm a First Robotics alumni. The program is supported on the backs of overworked teachers. And I will say that just firmly, right? And I don't think that First Robotics does a very good job of providing teachers with the support that they need in order to run robotics teams. I think that it's assumed that they just kind of have to figure it out. And so I think that when you're looking at ways for companies to better engage in the education process, the really simple, easy answer is provide those opportunities. And I think that when I, throughout my academic career, have like looked at internships and stuff like that, I've always been told like, oh, we'd love to have your skill set, right? Like, educators are great. We think they're so valuable in our workforce. Would you like to do it for free? Without every single, I can tell you like 95% of education internships are unpaid. Or it's volunteering, it's for a good cause. And it's like, if you really cared and you really valued my skill set, then you would pay me for it and not just tell me how much you really care. And so I think that like this, always the simple, easy answer of like, how can we get better workforce development is actually invest in the people who will be training the workforce development.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Daphne, for adding to that, and that adds a lot of value to your answers. Now, I have a question for Dr. Horvin. So, how can we ensure that emerging technologies are designed and developed with diversity and inclusivity in mind? I know a lot of these questions can be like, overlapping the topics that we might have discussed before, but I'm just like reading out the questions that we have from the audience.
Well, sure, Dia. Of course, the technology itself doesn't care about your diversity, but the people and the team that are developing it certainly do care, and your team will work better if it's a diverse team. This is one of the things that we learned early on in diversity, is that when a group of people are making a decision, that the quality of the decision is better if the team is diverse. But if the team is all the same, then you have one mind and you don't get as good at decisions. So this is true in any team, and management teams making decisions, but also in tech teams at the subject matter expert level. If you have a team that's all straight white men, then you tend to get a different culture, and that culture tends to be more embedded in the product. So having a diverse team is one good way to help the product be better and to help the team function better as well. I don't know specifically anything else to add to that. I've worked with diverse teams,
Yeah.
and I've seen really good results come out of those.
Sure, definitely. Thank you for your answer. I'm just gonna go ahead and mix a couple of questions together and put it out as a single question to Abhijit. So, are there any ethical considerations or like potential risks associated with the lack of diversity in the technical space? What should be addressed? That should be addressed.
Oh yeah, I mean definitely very loaded question, and the obvious answer is like yes, and a lot of them. It's hard to even know like where to start talking about that. But as we've already discussed here, when a very uniform set of people are making decisions for a very non-uniform, wider like audience space, that always comes with problems. We always know when a group of men sit together and talk about women's issues and make decisions regarding like women's issues, we know I don't even need to like talk about what are the issues that can come up there. Similarly, it definitely in a workspace, especially if you look at tech, for example, there's definitely a lot of issues that come up when people are not thinking about the different aspects of inclusion in there. When we talk about diversity and when we talk about inclusion, when it comes to like products, we always think about making the final products accessible to people. But there's like another aspect of it that it doesn't get talked about that often, which is like how do you make the process of creating those products and services more accessible and more inclusive? Like for example, we talk about programming, and we talk about like presentations. People have like weekly presentations, sprint planning, and all of that while a product is like being built, and all of that requires you to look at the screen and read out like what you see on the screen. But what if somebody in your team has visual challenges, or what if somebody who's going to like see the presentation later, what if they have visual challenges, right? You're going to like put like this random image or like this random meme that you found on the internet on your slide because you think that it's like really funny and it'll bring up like a jovial mood. But this person who has visual challenges can't really see that. They have no idea what people are laughing about, right? So one very quick thing that you can do to make that situation a lot better is to add like alt text or like captions to the image, so that if a visually challenged person is using like a screen recorder, it actually like records and explains the image to them. And that this is something that you can actually use a lot in social media as well. When you like share things on social media, previously on Instagram, I used to put image descriptions for everything whenever I share an image for people who are using like recorders to so that they know what I'm talking about. But then Instagram, I think, went on and added like an alt text option in the image itself so that I can like put it in there rather than in the description, and I've been using that ever since. And so that way, one other thing, very simple fix is color blindness. You might think that the colors you're putting in, you see like a good red, you see like a good green. You're like, oh, look at the red, look at the green. They're clearly very different, but they're not for everybody. There are and then there are different kinds of color blindness. Depending on what kind of color blindness somebody might have, they'll see those colors differently. And then I think tech has been sort of like doing, not all tech, but certain kinds of tech has definitely been doing like a good job to try and bridge that gap a little bit closely. If you look at Microsoft Windows now, there are like different modes for color blindness and everything now. And I believe like probably like MS Word has like this accessibility option in its review menu where you can go. PowerPoint has that too, I think, where you can go and it'll actually tell you things like the intensity between the colors you've chosen is not adequate enough for a colorblind person to like understand that and all of that. So I would definitely think it's really not acceptable for a very uniform base of people to make decisions for like a very non-uniform customer base or client base or audience base or whatever it is. There's definitely a lot of ethical considerations. I think the bigger problem comes in when people are not receptive to feedback. As Dr. Parrish said before, nobody knows everything about all cultures. Like it's all a learning curve for every single person. And you are going to make mistakes. Like every single person is going to make mistakes. Like I've made a lot of mistakes. I make mistakes every single day. Today I'm going to do something wrong. Tomorrow also I'm going to do something wrong. I know that for a fact. It's just a matter of like how receptive you are when either other people call you out or you yourself like call you out. If you're making decisions for like a very diverse group of people and you are not receptive to the suggestions when you're being called out for it, or you actually behave very badly and you sort of like react with your ego when you're called out on something, because there's a reason people are calling you out. And if you react to that with your ego, things like that are, I think, the bigger problem than actually doing something wrong. And that's where the whole concept of like self-growth comes into play. You always got to like approach things with like a self-growth and growth mindset in general. And I think that's what will fix all of that. But short answer, loads of ethical considerations for sure.
Sure. Beautifully answered. A lot of like tiny steps that anyone can take to make sure we live in a better way. Thank you so much for that. And we have like one final question that we can pick up before we conclude this discussion, and that's for Daphne. So, what steps can be taken to address the lack of representation in the leadership positions within the STEM?
Yeah. I'm not an expert on this or anything. All I can speak on is my own personal experience. But like just listening to like the other panelists speak, I think that I've maybe had like a bit of a different experience in STEM, in that I don't usually feel incredibly welcome in certain spaces, especially in high school. Like my high school engineering teacher would bully me on a regular basis, so that was fun. But I also, like I mentioned before, do a lot with FIRST Robotics, and well, that was an amazing experience for me. The other women in FIRST Robotics, we get together, we tell stories, we know what it's like, and we, the same stories over and over again. And a lot of people like to say that, oh, things are getting better, like there's more women who are going into STEM, so it's like it's a good environment now. It's way better than like previously. It's like, okay, yeah, maybe, probably, but that doesn't mean it's good. It's still bad. There's still rampant sexual harassment, right? I probably the OSTEM Professional Development Summit is the first conference I've ever been to where me or my friends were not sexually harassed, which is insane, right? That happens, and that it's such a common and okay occurrence. And I think that like the key part of that is that considerations are made not about making sure everyone feels included in these environments, but making sure that the image is okay while still the same people who've been doing the same crappy things continue to do the same crappy things. I mean, just like 1 or 2 years ago, our old president of Purdue, Mitch Daniels, sent out a email to casually the whole Purdue staff, faculty, and students, asking maybe we should be considering why there aren't enough men in engineering, because the women to men ratio had risen to, I think it was like 30% women that were being enrolled in like the College of Engineering, right? And so his question was, isn't that enough? That's kind of a lot. And so he sent this whole email out to everyone. I don't know who, someone must have approved it, right? Like surely he didn't just write it and send it with like no one looking at it. But he asked like, why are we so concerned with the amount of women in engineering? Because we have more than enough, and that women enrollment rates are going up, but men are going down, and this is messed up because this is prime baby making years for women that they're losing out on by getting their education and going to college and becoming engineers. And it was just, yeah, you know, casual things that the president of your university can just send to everyone. It's cool. And so like,
Yeah.
it's been, I personally have had a pretty good experience, right? Like I say all this, all things considered, it's pretty good, how bad it could be. And my current department and like the people I work with are super supportive and amazing. But I also, you know, have been in parts of conversations where people have told me that like, I'm not a real engineer because I'm in biological engineering, and that's the fake engineering, right? Only fake engineers do. Weirdly enough, the engineering fields that have a majority of women in them. That doesn't line up at all. Don't worry, that's not the reason. Some other random reason. But I think that part of that is being helped by more diverse people, like getting involved in leadership roles and starting to ask these questions of like, why do we tolerate this? And why are we putting up with this? And why have we continued to tolerate and put up with unacceptable behavior? But I think parts of it is that also at the same time, the work has to get put on the marginalized people often, right? To say something and make the changes, which is awful, right? It shouldn't have to be our problem, but it is. And so I think asking those questions and hey, running for those positions and being the person that says, hey, maybe we should, you know, organize some type of transport, right, to this conference that's us approved and us certified, so that like maybe women who are coming here by themselves aren't concerned about their safety, right? Or that maybe we have like a roundtable, you know, for women or for queer people or for people of color, right? I've had great experiences with like these casual conference roundtables, and we do them a lot in First Robotics in Indiana. So at every event we have a LGBTQ plus and women in STEM roundtable, and they're both always amazing, and it's great to talk to the high school students and let them know that it gets better and that it's okay. But that also, you know, these are challenges that we all deal with. So I guess my my short answer is that I don't really know, but it's kind of work that we have to do ourselves at a certain point. But it'd be great if other people stepped up and stopped accepting that it was just the way things are, and that's, you know, oh, that's just how Ted says stuff. Okay.
Yeah. I think I mean, like different varying levels of this, you know, these risks and like not being represented properly in the leadership. Everything is kind of pretty much there in maybe in like different levels in almost all the places. Maybe that might be one of the reasons why you got such a weird, absurd mail, or maybe the reason why we've also heard about this thing where the seat belts of the cars were not designed perfectly for including all the genders. Maybe the leadership over there were not having enough representation over there. So there can be like different reasons, or maybe like personally, I've also had like corporate experiences where like being a women leader, you have to put it out there, where you are forced to showcase yourself, or you have to like put in that extra effort to make yourself be taken seriously. Or maybe like all those maybe stereotypical things that we have been hearing for a while, but it is actually true. These are things that is actually happening out there, and maybe it has been changing in some places, maybe it has not yet been started changing, but it is happening. So I think we are kind of like running out of the time, and we are coming to the end of this panel discussion. As we draw near to the conclusion of our discussion on diversity in emerging tech, I would like to express my gratitude to everyone present here today. It has been an enlightening and thought-provoking session, and I'm honored to have been a part of this. Although our time today was limited, I want to acknowledge that there may still be unanswered questions and like unexplored aspects. However, I encourage each and every one of you to continue the dialogue beyond this panel discussion. Seek out additional resources, engage in conversations, and be the advocate for diversity in emerging tech within your own spheres of influence. So, thank you everyone for being part of this panel discussion. And as we wrap up, let us remember that diversity is not just merely a box to be, like checked out, or maybe a buzzword to be thrown around. It is the foundation upon which you can like build a stronger, more innovative, and like a fair tech industry that benefits us all. Once again, thanking all the panelists for being part of this panel discussion, and thank you so much to MEC and IEEE for organizing this discussion. Thank you once again for everyone for your participation as well. Let's carry on these discussions forward and work towards a future where diversity and emerging tech goes hand in hand. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
പീപ്പിൾ എല്ലാരും പോയോ? നമ്മുടെ ടീം ഗ്രൂപ്പിലെ ആക്റ്റീവ് ആയിട്ടുള്ള എല്ലാരും ഈ മീറ്റിലോട്ട് കേട്ടി എനിക്ക് തോന്നണില്ല. ഓക്കെ, വേറെ പെട്ടെന്ന്